The notification came at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning, and I almost missed it because I was busy making sure Hartwell Capital's senior partner had exactly the right coffee waiting on his desk before he arrived. Not just coffee. His coffee. Dark roast from a specific Ethiopian supplier, measured to 22 grams, water temperature at 201 degrees, 4 minutes in a French press, poured into a white ceramic mug that had to be pre-warmed first. I'd gotten it wrong exactly once. 6 months ago, on my third day. The look he gave me wasn't angry. It was patient in a way that somehow felt worse. I assumed you'd pay attention to the details, Miss Okafor, and I had, every single day since. My name is Adeze Okafor, and I had worked for Sterling Hartwell for 712 days. 712 mornings of arriving at 7:15, so everything would be perfect by the time he walked through the glass doors at 7:50 sharp. 712 days of learning the particular rhythm of a man who ran one of the most powerful private equity firms in Manhattan with the calm precision of someone who had never once second-guessed a decision in his life. The firm managed over $8 billion in assets. My job was to manage him, his calendar, his correspondence, his preferred temperature in the conference room, the fact that he needed a 5-minute buffer between back-to-back meetings, or he'd come out of the second one with a tension in his jaw that would last until noon. I was very good at my job. The notification was from a number I didn't recognize. Just wanted you to know. I've been watching you, and I think it's time we finally meet. Vi set my phone face down and went to warm his mug. Sterling arrived at 7:49, which meant traffic on the FDR had been better than usual. He didn't say good morning out loud. He never did. But he gave me a brief nod as he passed my desk, the kind that meant the coffee better be ready. It was. He disappeared into his office, and I heard the familiar sound of his chair, the click of his laptop, the brief silence before the day officially began. Miss Okafor. His voice through the intercom, already clipped and focused. The Meridian Group proposal. Walk me through your concerns. I'd flagged 3 clauses the night before. He didn't ask me to. I'd done it because I'd learned that the things he didn't say out loud were often the most important ones. Section 4 assumes a 60-day closing window, but Meridian's last 2 deals both ran 85 to 90. If we build our leverage timeline around their estimate rather than their history, we're leaving ourselves exposed. I paused. And the earnout structure in Section 7 conflicts with the tax treatment in the appendix. Someone on their side either made a mistake or is hoping we won't notice. Silence. Then, which do you think it is? They didn't make a mistake. Another pause, shorter. Revise accordingly. Have it back before noon. The intercom clicked off. That was Sterling Hartwell in full. No praise, no confirmation. Just the work moving forward as if the right answer were simply the expected baseline. I'd been the one to revise 3 of his last 4 major deal memos. His previous assistant had lasted 4 months, the one before her 2. The partners in the firm had a private bet, according to Yemi in legal, who told me everything, about how long any of us lasted. I'd beaten every record in the firm's history, and Sterling had acknowledged this once, briefly, by giving me a raise without my asking, and leaving a note on my desk that said simply, "Efficient as always, Adeze." He'd used my first name exactly once before that. I'd noticed. I tried not to think about the text. By noon, I'd handled the Meridian revisions, rescheduled a lunch that had collapsed due to a scheduling conflict on the client's end, and fielded 6 calls, 2 of which required judgment calls I technically wasn't authorized to make, but that Sterling had never once disputed when he saw the outcomes. Yemi appeared at my desk at 12:15, with her lunch and barely contained energy. "Did you see them?" I looked up from the budget reconciliation. "See what?" "The flowers downstairs." She sat on the edge of the chair across from me like she'd been invited. "The front desk called upstairs about them an hour ago. They're addressed to you, Adeze, you. Everyone in the elevator is talking about it." I hadn't ordered any flowers. I didn't have anyone in my life who would send flowers to my workplace. "There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake." Front desk confirmed the name twice. Yemi leaned forward. "They're peonies. Like a lot of peonies. White and blush. Absolutely gorgeous. Very expensive. And there's a card." My stomach did something uncomfortable. "What does it say?" "For the woman who makes the whole building brighter. No last name, just the initial V." The text from this morning came back to me like cold water. I've been watching you. I kept my face neutral. I'll deal with it later. Deal with it. Yemi stared at me. Someone sent you a small fortune in peonies, and you're going to deal with it later? I have a budget reconciliation due. She left reluctantly, and I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on the numbers in front of me while the question of who V was sat at the back of my mind like a splinter. At 4:30, Sterling called me into his office. He was standing by the window, which he did when he was thinking through something complicated. His charcoal suit was impeccable. His dark hair, just slightly longer than most men at his level bothered to keep, had the look of someone who had more important things to schedule than haircuts. He was 41. He looked like someone who had decided at 30 to stop aging out of sheer inconvenience. "The flowers downstairs," he said without turning around. "Security flagged the delivery. They're addressed to you." "So I've heard." He turned then, and his eyes, dark gray, the kind of color that changed with the light, held something I couldn't immediately read. "Did you order them? No, do you know who sent them?" "I have a first initial and a text from an unknown number. That's all." Something shifted in his expression. The line of his jaw tightened fractionally. "Forward me the text, Sterling." His name came out of my mouth before I could stop it, and I saw the flicker of surprise at my use of it. We were still in the Mr. Hartwell phase, I corrected automatically. "Mr. Hartwell, it's a text from an unknown contact. It's not a security matter. Everything that happens to the people in this building is a security matter." He said it flatly, like it was simply a fact, and not an opinion. "Forward it. Are you going to tell me why?" He looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I counted 3 seconds in my head. "Because I want to know who thinks they can contact my executive assistant at her place of work without going through proper channels. No one goes through channels to send flowers to a person. In this firm, they do." He walked back to his desk, sitting down and pulling his laptop toward him like the conversation was concluded. "Take the flowers home, or have them thrown out." "I don't want them in the lobby." I stood my ground for exactly 3 more seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than anyone else in the building ever stood their ground with Sterling Hartwell. "They're my flowers." "They are." He didn't look up. "So you decide what to do with them. I'm just telling you they're not staying downstairs." That evening, I rode the elevator down with a vase of peonies that cost more than my grocery budget for the month. The front desk attendant helped me carry them to the curb for a cab. As I waited, I heard Sterling's voice behind me, quiet, measured, but carrying the way his voice always did in marble-floored spaces. He was speaking to Yemi, who had coincidentally been leaving at the same time. "Ms. Okafor has a car service. She doesn't take cabs." I turned around. He was standing 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, watching the flower situation with an expression that was carefully arranged into professional neutrality, but his jaw was doing that thing again. The thing where something was happening underneath that he wasn't saying. "I usually take the subway," I said. "Not tonight." He held my gaze for one more of those counted seconds. "The car is already arranged. Go home." A daze. He used my first name again. I thought about that the entire ride uptown. My apartment in Harlem was small and deliberately simple. Good light, good books, decent kitchen. Not a place where peonies this extravagant belonged. I set them on the windowsill because I didn't have a table big enough for the vase, and they made the whole room smell like something from a different life. I found the card tucked into the stems, for the woman who makes the whole building brighter. I've been waiting for the right moment to introduce myself. Vincent. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, same as this morning. "I hope you liked them." White peonies seemed more you than roses. I pay attention to details too, a days. "Dinner Saturday? I'll send a car." The way he'd used my name made my skin tighten. Not warmly. Clinically, the way you'd use the name of a subject you'd been studying. My phone rang. Sterling's direct line, not the office line, the one he'd given me for actual emergencies. "Did you receive any other contact?" No greeting. His voice had that particular flatness that meant he was controlling something. "A text. Just now." He signed it, Vincent. "Don't respond. Don't delete it." A pause. "What's your building security situation?" "I live in a walk-up in Harlem, not a Volta." "I'm aware. Are your locks standard, Sterling?" He said it without heat, just a correction. "You called me first," I said. "Which makes this personal enough for first names, doesn't it?" Silence. Then, very quietly, "Lock your door. I'm looking into this tonight." He hung up. I locked my door. I checked my windows. I stood in my kitchen with peonies on my windowsill, and the growing, unsettling certainty that whoever had sent them hadn't done it because he liked me. He'd done it because he'd been watching me long enough to know details. My name, my workplace, the fact that I apparently made the building brighter, and because those details had value to someone for reasons that had nothing to do with romance. I was right. I just didn't know yet how right. Sterling called a meeting the next morning, but not in his office. He used the firm's secure conference room on the 42nd floor, the one with no windows on the interior walls, and electronic shielding that the senior partners used for conversations they didn't want leaving the building. I'd been in it twice, both times to deliver urgent documents. Both times I'd felt like I was standing inside the world's most expensive vault. He was already there when I arrived. The table held a folder, a laptop, and 2 cups of coffee, mine with more cream than his, which meant he'd paid enough attention at some point to know how I took it. "Sit down," he said. Not unkindly. I sat. He slid the folder across. "Vincent Caro." He remained standing, hands in his pockets, while I opened it. His father is Gerald Caro, Caro Logistics. They move freight through the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and into Canada. Legitimate on paper. But Gerald has spent 15 years cultivating relationships with port authorities that go well beyond professional courtesy. I looked at the photographs. A man in his late 30s, handsome in a tailored, deliberate way. Photos of him at a coffee shop I went to on Wednesday mornings. At a museum opening I'd attended with Yemi in September. Outside my building. My hands were very still on the folder. "He's been watching me for how long?" I asked. Based on what our security team was able to trace back, approximately 5 months. Sterling's voice was steady, factual, as though he were walking me through a deal memo, and not photographs of someone surveilling me. "He attended 3 events where you were present before making contact. He didn't approach you directly any of those times. Why? Because Vincent Caro doesn't make unscripted moves." Sterling finally sat, across from me, and when he looked at me directly there was something in his expression I hadn't seen before. Not the professional assessment I'd catalogued over 700 days. Something else. Controlled, but there. 3 years ago, his father's company was bidding for a major logistics contract that would have given them access to several of our portfolio company's supply chains. We declined to facilitate the introduction. Gerald Caro took it as a personal slight. Understanding came slowly, then all at once. "And Vincent thinks I can give him a second path in. He thinks you have access to deal flow information, shipping partner contracts, and operational data for 7 of our portfolio companies." Sterling held my gaze. "He's not wrong. You do. I would never. I know." No hesitation. Not even a fraction. "That's not what I'm saying." The weight of the next silence was different. He believed me before I finished the sentence. After 712 days, that should not have surprised me as much as it did. "So what happens now?" I asked. He opened his laptop, turning it to face me. "You respond to his dinner invitation." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, you accept. You go." With appropriate security, a wire, monitoring, a team positioned outside. His voice was entirely rational, entirely calm, which made it somehow worse. "You let him believe his approach is working. You gather what he's actually after. Document the offer when he makes it explicitly, and then we hand everything to the SEC's whistleblower team, who have been building a case on Gerald Caro's port relationships for 2 years and have hit every procedural wall imaginable. You want me to spy on him. I want you to help me protect the people in this firm, who trust us with their assets." He closed the laptop. 7 of our portfolio companies have employees, ADs, real people with families, whose retirements and jobs depend on us not getting compromised. If Caro gains what he's after, the regulatory exposure alone could unwind 3 of those companies inside of 18 months. I absorbed this. Looked at the photographs again. The coffee shop I went to every Wednesday. He'd been 30 feet away and I hadn't felt a thing. And if I refuse, then I handle Vincent Caro a different way. His voice went very level. One that involves less cooperation with federal agencies and more direct pressure on his father's port relationships, which gets messy and expensive and solves the problem but doesn't address the underlying issue. He paused. "Your way is cleaner. It's not my way yet. No. something that might have been the corner of a smile on anyone else. It isn't. I thought about it for exactly 48 seconds. Then, I have conditions. He didn't look surprised. Of course you do. You tell me everything. I'm not walking into a room wired for sound without knowing the full picture, who I'm dealing with, what they've done, what they want. I folded my hands on the table. And when this is over, we have a conversation, a real one, about what you just said, about protecting the people in this firm. Because there was something in the way you said it that had nothing to do with portfolio companies. He looked at me for a long time, long enough that I stopped counting. Agreed, he said finally, to both. The next 4 days were something I hadn't known to expect from Sterling Hartwell, intense, thorough, and surprisingly patient. The firm's head of security, a quiet man named Darren, who moved through spaces like he was counting exits, walked me through how to wear a wire without it reading through fabric, how to position myself at a restaurant table to keep sight lines clear, how to signal with a gesture so small it looked like I was tucking my hair back. Sterling sat in on every briefing. He interrupted constantly, not to second-guess the security team, but to add scenarios, contingencies, things that could go wrong, and how to handle them. By the second day, I realized he'd been running war games in his head since the morning after my flowers arrived. On the fourth night, after Darren and the rest of the team had gone, Sterling found me in the conference room, going through surveillance photos of Vincent Caro. "You've been here since 6 this morning," he said from the doorway. "So have you." He came in, shut the door, sat across from me, not at the head of the table where he usually sat, but directly across, close enough that the overhead light fell differently on his face. I could see the tiredness he didn't let into his voice. "I could find another way to handle this," he said. "Your other way doesn't end without someone getting hurt." I set down a photograph. This way ends with Vincent Caro in front of a federal prosecutor and Gerald Caro losing the port relationships he's spent 15 years building. That's better. It requires you to be in a room with someone who's been watching you for 5 months. I know. Does that scare you? I thought about it, honestly. Less than it probably should. He was quiet for a moment. That's either very brave or very stubborn. I haven't decided which. Why can't it be both? Something happened in his expression. Not a smile. Sterling Hartwell didn't smile easily, but a loosening like a door opening just slightly. "Both," he allowed. "Probably both." I looked at him directly. "Why does this matter so much to you?" "The right answer is that you're protecting the firm's interests and your clients. But that's not the complete answer." He was quiet long enough that I thought he'd deflect. Then, "Because you walked into my office 700 days ago and corrected my assumption about a merger timeline before I'd even finished explaining it. And you've been doing it ever since. Quietly, without fanfare, in ways that have saved this firm probably $40 million in aggregate that will never appear on any single line item because prevention doesn't get documented the way disasters do." He met my eyes. "You've never once asked for credit. You've never once threatened to leave. You've never once let me treat you as less than what you are, which is the most capable person in this building who doesn't have their name on the door." He paused. "And someone tried to use that against you, against us. That's not it." The last part came out rough, like it had been sitting somewhere for a while. "Oos," I repeated. He looked away, looked back. Figure of speech. No, it wasn't. The silence stretched, differently than before. Not professional, not tense, just honest and a little dangerous. "The meeting with Caro is Saturday," he said finally, not quite changing the subject, not quite staying on it. "Darren's team will have the restaurant covered. I'll be in a vehicle nearby." He paused, trying very hard to behave rationally. "You don't have to tell me what that means." "No," he said quietly. "I don't suppose I do." Saturday came with the specific anxiety of something that feels both important and surreal. I wore my own clothes, a dark burgundy wrap dress I'd had for 3 years, professional without being corporate, and flat shoes instead of heels because Darren had advised it, and I'd decided that if I was going into a controlled situation, I was doing it on my own terms physically. Sterling had sent a brief text that morning. "The reservation is confirmed. Darren's team is in place. Be careful." Then, after a pause, "You look good in burgundy for what it's worth." I had no idea how he knew that. Vincent Caro stood when I arrived at the restaurant. A midtown place that didn't take walk-ins and didn't need to advertise. And he was exactly as calibrated as his photographs suggested. Good-looking in the particular way of men who've been told they're good-looking long enough to weaponize it. Easy smile. Tailored jacket. Hair with the kind of artful carelessness that takes 20 minutes to achieve. A daze. He said my name like he'd practiced it. Thank you for coming. I was a little worried the flowers were too much. They were, I said pleasantly, taking my seat. But they were beautiful. He smiled. Reading this as encouragement. I believe in making an impression. Life's too short for subtle. Tell me about yourself, I said. Beyond the flowers and the dramatic entrance. He talked easily, smoothly, the way people do when they've told the same story enough times that it no longer feels like a performance. His family's logistics company, his own role in expanding their operations northward into Canada. How much he found corporate Manhattan tedious. A detail designed to make me feel like we were both outsiders in the same sterile world. Then, carefully, approximately 12 minutes in, you must find it limiting, honestly. Working for someone like Hartwell. I tilted my head. Limiting how? Talented people often outgrow their positions without realizing it. He swirled his glass. You have access to more information than most directors at that firm. Deal flow, operational data, partner relationships. That knowledge has value, Adiz. Not just to Hartwell Capital, but in other contexts. Other contexts meaning your family's company. He paused, then smiled less warmly. I like directness, yes. We're in a growth phase. Having someone inside the firms we're looking to partner with would be useful. You want me to share confidential information about my employer's clients. I want to offer you a consulting arrangement that compensates you fairly for insights you already possess. He leaned forward. $250,000. Paid to a private LLC of your choosing. Clean. Documented as a legitimate consulting contract. He paused. All I need are the operational frameworks for 3 of Hartwell's portfolio companies. Nothing that would show up as a breach, just structural information. Context. There it was, clear, explicit, documented on 3 separate audio feeds, and 2 cameras positioned by Darren's team in the 2 hours before the reservation. I set down my water glass. That's a generous offer, I think so. I'm going to need time to consider it. His smile widened. Victory, premature and sweet-looking. Of course, there's no rush. I'm a patient man, I smiled back. I've heard that about you. We finished dinner politely, and when he walked me to the door, he pressed a business card into my hand with a private number written on the back. Call me when you're ready, he said quietly. I think we understand each other. I think we do, I said. The car had barely pulled away from the curb before my phone rang. Sterling, he made the offer. I know. Darren's team was monitoring. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it wasn't. Are you all right? I'm fine. Annoyed, mostly. I watched the city passing outside. He's very smooth. If I hadn't known going in, it might have worked. That's a thought I'd rather not sit with, then don't. I paused. He thinks I'm considering it. That gives us a window. We have enough, Sterling said. I spoke with the SEC contact while you were at dinner. What you got tonight, combined with what they already have on Gerald Caro's port dealings, they're moving forward. A brief silence. You don't need to do anything else, Adaze. It's over. I was surprised, though I probably shouldn't have been. That fast? They've been waiting for something exactly like this for 20 months. Direct evidence of solicitation tied to a documented chain of surveillance. He paused. They'll want your testimony, a full account of every contact. But Vincent Caro is going to have a very difficult few weeks. I leaned my head back against the seat. Outside, the lights of the city blurred and steadied, and his father. Gerald will have to decide how much he's willing to lose to protect a son who went off script. Sterling's voice was measured. My guess is he'll cooperate with the investigation to limit his own exposure, which means the port relationships collapse and the firms he was using them to leverage become unavailable to him, without anyone getting hurt. A pause, quieter. Because of you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, you mentioned something the other night, that you wanted to have a conversation when this was over. Silence. I remember, he said. It's over. A longer silence. Come in Monday at the usual time. I'll have coffee ready. Another pause. I know how you take it. I know you do, I said. You've known for a long time. He didn't respond to that. But he didn't deny it either. Monday came, and the coffee was waiting on my desk. Not his, mine. In a mug I'd never seen before, deep green ceramic, simple, exactly the kind of thing I'd have picked myself. A detail so specific it could only have been intentional. I stood in front of it for a moment, then picked it up, carried it into his office, and sat down across from him without being invited. He looked at me across his desk. Neither of us said anything immediately. In 718 days, I'd never just walked in and sat down without a reason. He'd never looked at me quite the way he was looking at me now, like a problem he'd spent a long time solving and had finally, quietly, decided he didn't want to solve. "I've been thinking about what to say," he started. "Don't," I said. "You're better when you don't overthink it. Just say the thing." He was quiet for another second. Then, "You make this place work. Not just logistically, though you do, in ways that would take 3 people to replace. But it's the other thing, the way you come in every morning at 7:15, and for about 10 minutes before the floor gets loud, everything feels like it makes sense." He held my gaze. I've been managing that feeling for a long time, telling myself it was professional, that crossing a line with someone in your position would be inappropriate and complicated and exactly the kind of thing I don't do. "You don't do a lot of things," I said. "That's not always a virtue." A breath that might have been a laugh. "No, it isn't." He leaned forward, forearms on the desk. "You've been in my corner for 700 days without asking for anything you hadn't earned. And I've spent those days noticing things I told myself I had no right to notice. The way you tap your pen when you're working through something difficult. The fact that you always read 2 chapters of a book at lunch. Not 1, not 3, exactly 2. The coffee. The way you handle every crisis I hand you without any of the drama that would make it easier to pretend the work is the whole of it." He paused. "It's not the whole of it," he said. "It hasn't been for a long time. And the thing with Caro, watching someone try to get close to you for reasons that had nothing to do with who you actually are, made it very difficult to keep pretending otherwise." The morning light came through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, falling across the desk in long parallels. The city below was already moving, urgent and indifferent. "So, what are you actually saying?" I asked, not because I didn't know, because I wanted him to say it without cover. "I'm saying that I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. "Not as your employer, not as some crisis debrief. Just dinner. If you want that, knowing the complications that come with it. Knowing that I'm not a simple person and that my world isn't a simple world. I've worked for you for 718 days, I said. I know exactly what kind of world this is, and I want dinner." I stood up, taking my coffee with me. "Wednesday. Somewhere I choose, not somewhere you've already scoped for sightlines." The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. Wednesday, and Sterling. I used his first name deliberately, watching his eyes register it. "Whatever we do next, we talk. Fully. No half-truths, no managing my reactions. If something is a risk, you tell me. If something is complicated, you tell me. I'm not interested in a version of this where you think you're protecting me by keeping me in the dark." "I know that about you," he said quietly. "I've known it for a while." "Good." I moved toward the door. "The Meridian Group sent revised terms this morning. Section 4 is still wrong. I'll have comments on your desk by 10. M's. Okafor." I paused at the door. "A days," he corrected, and the way he said it, like he'd been holding it somewhere and just set it down, made something shift in my chest. "Thank you." I nodded, went back to my desk, opened the Meridian file, and tried to focus on the numbers, which was difficult, because the mug was green and warm and had been chosen with the specific care of someone who had been paying attention long before he admitted it. 4 months later, Sterling told me everything. Not strategically, not managed. Everything. His father's business, which had not been the kind that invited scrutiny. The specific event, when Sterling was 19 and finishing his first year at Columbia, that made him decide the money he'd inherited was going to be rebuilt into something that could exist in daylight. The years of deliberate construction, legitimate capital, legal structures. The kind of institutional reputation that insulated rather than concealed. The partners who knew pieces. The things he'd done early that still lived in files he'd never fully closed. We were in his apartment, our routine by then, moving between his place and mine with the particular ease of people who've decided the logistics don't need to be formal. And he told me all of it at the kitchen table with 2 glasses of wine neither of us was really drinking. "You needed to know," he said when he finished, "before this goes further, before it becomes something you can't walk away from without cost." I looked at him for a long moment. "Do you want me to walk away?" "No. No hesitation. But I want you to have the choice." "I have the choice," I said. "I'm choosing to stay. But I want you to hear me when I say that the cost you're worried about, you carrying all of this alone, that's the thing I'm least willing to let you keep doing." He was quiet. "You built something real," I said, "from something that wasn't. And you've been managing the distance between those 2 things by yourself for 20 years. You don't have to do that anymore." I reached across the table. "That's what you're actually offering me when you say something you can't walk away from. Not the risk, the share of it." His hand turned over, holding mine. "You're the most unsettling person I've ever met," he said. "You're not the first person to say that. I mean it as the highest possible compliment." The Vincent Caro situation resolved cleanly, if slowly. He accepted a plea arrangement on the federal charges. Gerald Caro's port relationships collapsed under the weight of the SEC investigation. Not dramatically, but thoroughly, the way things do when the structure was never as solid as it appeared. Neither of them made contact again. Darren's security protocols remained in place, upgraded, though the specific threats faded. What didn't fade was the particular shape of the life we were building, careful and honest and, in its way, exactly as complicated as Sterling had warned me it would be. His world was not simple. The firm operated in spaces that required judgment calls the textbooks didn't cover. There were conversations I sat in on, eventually, that I understood the weight of, in ways his previous assistants never had. But I was good at my job, and my job had always been to hold the complicated things without dropping them. 14 months after Vincent Caro's flowers arrived in the lobby of a building on 5th Avenue, Sterling and I got married in a small ceremony in Connecticut. 30 people. A barn that belonged to his college roommate, an October afternoon where the light came through the leaves in long gold lines, and my mother cried before the vows even started. He wore charcoal. Of course he did. At the reception, his head of legal, a dry, precise woman named Frances who had worked with him for 12 years and approved of approximately nothing, pulled me aside and said, very quietly, "He's been different since you. Better at the things that matter. I don't say that lightly." I thanked her, and meant it. Later, Sterling found me standing by the window of the barn's upper room, looking out at the dark tree line, the lights from the tent below casting everything in soft gold. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to stand beside me. "The coffee," I said. He laughed, a real one, the kind he gave rarely and without calculation. "What about it?" "The first morning you had it wrong, and I had to remake it." I was terrified. I leaned against him, and his arm came around me automatically, the way it always did, proprietary and warm. "I thought you'd fire me on the spot. Instead, you just looked at it like the temperature was a philosophical problem you found interesting." "It was a philosophical problem." He pressed his lips briefly to my hair. "I was also wondering if you were going to apologize or just fix it. You fixed it, without apologizing. I didn't think apologies helped if you hadn't solved the problem yet." "I know." His arm tightened. I noticed. Outside, the party continued without us for a few minutes, everyone bright and warm, and celebrating something they'd probably seen coming before we had. The October night was cold and clear and enormous, the way nights feel when you're standing at the beginning of something you chose with full knowledge and no reservation. "I have conditions," I said, "for what comes next." I felt him smile against my hair. "Of course you do. We make decisions together, the big ones. No protective unilateralism, agreed. And when something is complicated, financially, professionally, anything, you tell me. I'm not a liability to be managed. I'm a partner, agreed." His voice was quiet and certain, and a daze. The way he said my name was still, after 14 months, the version of it that felt most like mine. "When I tell you I'm in this completely, I mean that in the way I mean very few things. Absolutely and without qualification." I turned to look at him. In the half-light, with the sounds of people celebrating below us and the whole complicated world outside, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had built something real from something difficult and was still building. "I know," I said. "I've known for a while." He kissed me the way he did most things, deliberately, without hurry, like it was the only thing happening in the world. And for those few minutes, standing above everything we'd navigated to get here, it was. The rest could wait. It always would.